Morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Pre-Pesach Learning Program. I just want to give credit to the corporate sponsor, Bernathen Rosenberg, along with the daily sponsor, Moshe and Rochelle Yeager, on the Lili Nishmas, Moshe ben Meir David, whose yahrzeit was Gimel Nisan, and the speaker sponsor, David Levy, on the yahrzeit of his dear parents, Dr. Robert and Ruth Levy. Allah Shalom, 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 and Aliyah. Today we have the schus of hearing from Rabbi Glatstein, somebody that he doesn't know, but I admired him way back when he was a Rav in a small shul in Queens, and the chizuk and the strength that he gave to his congregants. I knew that something special was going to happen, and you guys will see from the all the different shiurim he's given, along with the sparm that he's written, his Torah breadth has really spread across the world. And without further introduction, we'd like to hear from Rabbi Glatstein.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's really a great pleasure to see people taking time out of their day to prepare for the Yom Tov of Pesach. It's really very special. You know, there's an idea that actually preparation is more important than the mitzvah itself. You know, we see that by Sukkos, where we say that when it speaks about the mitzvah of taking the lulav and esrog, it says you should take for yourself by Yom Harishon, or L'kachtem lachem by Yom Harishon, take on the first day. So the Medrash asks, what do you mean the first day? It's the 15th of the month. Why is it called Bayom HaRishon? So the Medrash says the first day of Sukkot says Rishon lecheshbon avonos. It's the first day that God starts calculating sin after Yom Kippur. So all the Achronim ask, the Taz asks, what do you mean it's the first day God starts calculating sin? Well, the Medrash says because in the days in between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, people are protected by preparing for the Yom Tov of Sukkot. Okay, great. So then why aren't they protected sitting in the sukkah? If they're protected preparing for sukkahs, building the sukkah, buying the daled minim, why aren't they protected shaking the lulav and sitting in the sukkah? And the Shem Shmuel says very simply, because the power, the spiritual protection that preparing for a mitzvah affords you is more powerful than the performance of the mitzvah itself. There's something very immersive about preparing for a mitzvah. So these days, the greatest way to prepare for the Yom Tov of Pesach is to learn about the Yom Tov. I actually have a new Haggadah. There are some of the best Haggadahs that were ever written came out in the last couple days. I'm just telling you, my personal recommendations. They came out this year with the Haggadah. If you're not going to get mine, then I'll tell you which Haggadahs to get. The Haggadah of Rabbi Yosef Engel. They just came out. The Haggadah of Rabbi Yosef Engel, it's called Tiferes Yosef. The Haggadah of the Shvilei Pinchas, the Pinchas Friedman, just came to America. There are probably a couple copies left in Z. Berman's. The Haggadah of Reb David Cohen, Rosh Yeshiva of Chevron, mind-boggling. And little secret, later on today, a small shipment of the following Haggadah is coming to America. It's called Oitzer Pla'os HaHaggadah. You ever see the set Oitzer Pla'os HaTorah? Oitzer Pla'os HaHaggadah. Those are my personal recommendations. That nothing to do with this year. The Young Israel is not getting a cut from the sales. Just mentioning. Anyway, there are many, many Haggadahs that are written. I would like to share with you this morning 3 approaches to the Haggadah. 2 very fundamental and 1 very original. And just to open up our minds, what we're trying to do with the Haggadah. You know, back in the day, if you wanted to buy a book. Oh, something happened over here. Okay, back in the day, if you wanted to buy a book, so the halacha, if you wanted to get an idea what a book was about, so what would you do? You open up the book, you read the beginning of the book, you read the end of the book, and that gives you a pretty good idea what the book is about. Actually, the Gemara applies the following principle to the Torah. That the Gemara says, what's the Torah all about? What's the subject matter of the Torah? So the Gemara in Sotah says on Daf Lamed Vav, the Torah begins that God clothed Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava. The Torah ends that Hashem buried Moshe Rabbeinu. It begins with Malbish Harumim. It ends with Kavuras Mesim. Says the Gemara in Sotah, the Torah is kulai chesed. It's entirely kindness. How do we know? Because it begins with chesed, it ends with chesed, it must be completely chesed. So let's apply that paradigm to Haggadah Shel Pesach. How does the Haggadah begin? Haggadah begins, Hashata Hacha Lashana Haba Ba'arad Yisrael. This year we're here, next year in the land of Israel. How does the Haggadah end? The last words of the Haggadah proper are Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim. Friends, let me ask you a question. Is that indicative of what the subject matter of the Haggadah is about? Is the Haggadah really about this year we're here, next year we're in Israel, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim? That has nothing to do with what the Haggadah is about. The Haggadah is a book of history about the Exodus, about all the miracles of Yetzias Mitzrayim, 10 in Mitzrayim, 50 al Hayam, 200 in Mitzrayim, 250 al Hayam. Why would the Haggadah begin and end with L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim? That's a very beautiful refrain. We always like to say that, but it's not really reflective of the subject matter of the Haggadah Shel Pesach. And the answer is, it's very reflective of the subject matter of the Haggadah Shel Pesach. Because if your kids are going to ask you, hey Dad, why are we reading a book about ancient history that happened 3,300 years ago? How is it relevant to us? This is the central message of the Haggadah. The Navi tells us, Ki meitzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim arenu niflais. The way I took you out of Egypt, I'm going to make miracles for you in the future. So, the simple understanding of this pasuk in the Navi is that the Navi is telling us, just like the Almighty made miracles for the Jewish people, He is going again to make miracles for us. That's not what it means. The same way, Ramban teaches us that the events of Sefer Bereshis are pre-enactment, are Maseh Avos Siman Labanim, that whatever Avraham did created the future history of the Jewish people, that the activities of the Avos literally were the creation of the destiny of the Jewish people. So Avram Avinu had a longing to go to the land of Israel. So Jews forever have a longing to go to the land of Israel. And Sarah Imenu was taken captive by Paroi. So in Egypt later, the Jews are going to go down and they're going to want to kill the baby boys, to abduct the girls. Just like all the events of the book of Bereshis created the future history of the Jewish people, what creates the miracles of La'asad Lavai, of the future redemption of Jewish people? In other words, what events in history were the pre-enactment, were the predecessor, created the future destiny of the Jewish people? The answer is the events of Yetzias Mitzrayim literally create the future redemption of the Jewish people. In fact, Rabbeinu B'chai says that before Mashiach comes, there will be 10 plagues against the nation of the world, paralleling the Eser Makos in Mitzrayim. He says there will be another Kriyas Yamsov. Rabbeinu B'chai writes, Kol Hanavim Misnaveim B'signoin Echad. All the prophets, prophecy in the same vein, that the events of the future redemption will parallel precisely the events of Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Exodus was a dress rehearsal of sorts of what the Gula Hasidah will look like. You know, there's a Lashon we say in the Haggadah. Do you remember this? After Dayenu. Al achas kama v'kama toiva kifula umechupeles. All the more so, a double and quadruple benefit that the Rebbeinu Shalom did for us by making all these miracles. Think carefully about the terminology kifula umechupeles. What do those words mean? Why were the miracles of Egypt kifula umechupeles? Now, one of the best and most fundamental Haggadahs ever written, Haggadah Masa Nisim of the Baal Nesivos HaMishpat. You know, the two classic Sifrei Lamdos in the Olam HaYeshivos, the Ketzois HaChoshen, Nesivos HaMishpat. The Masa Nisim Haggadah is one of the most fundamental Haggadahs. He says the terminology Kefula Umechupelas indicates this idea that we're conveying from Rabbeinu B'chai, that every event that happened in Mitzrayim was the dress rehearsal for the great miracles that will happen before the coming of Mashiach. In that sense, when we're reading the Haggadah and your kid says, you know, this happened so long ago, what you should say is, honey, we're not reading about ancient history, we're reading about the future destiny of the Jewish people. The Haggadah is literally the handbook of the final redemption. Everything that happened is for us to anticipate and yearn for future attractions. You don't tell them, you don't tell your family, you don't tell your friends, you don't tell yourself that this is about the past, it's about our future. And this is indicated by the two bookends of the Haggadah. The Haggadah begins Hashata Hacha L'Shana Abba Ba'ard Yisrael. It ends L'Shana Abba B'Yushalayim. This is not just wishful thinking. That sets the tone for the main theme of the Haggadah. It's not about what happened. It's about what we look forward to. That's approach number one. Approach number two. I want to ask you a very interesting question. What's the reason for matzah? So what do you mean? We say in the beginning, we had nothing to eat in Egypt. You know, they didn't have restaurants. They ate matzah. Matzah stays in the system a long time. It's difficult to digest it, and it satisfies. That's what we say in the beginning of the Haggadah. Yeah, but at the end of the Haggadah, Ram Gamliel gives a totally different reason. Ram Gamliel says matzah symbolizes the swift freedom of the Jewish people, that we didn't have time for our bread to rise. So make up your mind. Is matzah what we say in the beginning of the Haggadah? Is matzah what we say at the end of the Haggadah? And the Vilna Gaon and the Abarbanel are both bothered by this question, and therefore they say, the reason for the entity of matzah is it reminds us of the bread we ate in Egypt. But that's not why we eat matzah. Ram Gamliel is addressing matzah zu she'anu oichlem al shema. Why do we have to eat it? If it's just to remind us what they ate, so we'll remember what they ate. We don't have to actually eat it. You know, if you wanted to remember or think about what the hostages are going through or went through, you could put on your table the types of food that they ate, but why would you have to actually eat it? So that the Haggadah is addressing. Matzah zu she'anu oichlin. Why do we eat it? That's to commemorate the freedom. That's the Abarbanel and the Gra. Amazingly, you know, the Ramban writes, there are two reasons. There are just two reasons for matzah. On the one hand, it symbolizes what they ate in Egypt, and on the other hand, it also symbolizes what they ate when they left. So I was troubled. Okay, if there are two reasons, why do we emphasize the first reason in the beginning of the Seder and the second reason at the end of the Seder? Shouldn't we put the two together? I mean, it's a little bit confusing. Let's deal with the subject of matzah in an organized fashion. Why do we eat matzah? So say halach ma'anya and say Ram Gamliel hayom. Why do we have these two different reasons for the mitzvah of matzah? There is an incredible Chassam Sofer. Chassam Sofer deals with the question all the Rishonim deal with, and that is the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is the mitzvah d'oraisa. We always make brachos on mitzvahs, certainly mitzvah d'oraisa. Why don't we make a bracha on the Haggadah? Asher kedushanim b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu l'saper b'yetzias Mitzrayim. Why don't we make that bracha? So Chassam Sofer quotes Rav Amram Gaon and other Rishonim who say we do. The bracha on the second kos, Asher ga'alanu, is the bracha on the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is very difficult. The bracha you say when the mitzvah is over. Since when do you make brachas when mitzvahs are over? We all know that you have to make brachas not when they're over, but when they're over lasiyasan, when they're before you perform the mitzvah, before you put on talis, you make the bracha. Before you put on tefillin, you make the bracha. Why in the world would you make the bracha after you've already performed the mitzvah? I'll tell you a lamda shakasha. Imagine you have a guy, he's Chanukah, he's shaking the lulav an esrog. What would you call him? He's out of his mind. What's he doing? The mitzvah's over. We do mitzvahs at the prescribed time. If you continue to do the mitzvah after the prescribed time, you are not doing a meaningful activity. So let's talk about the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. What is the prescribed time for Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim? Well, it's connected to eating matzah. Well, when is the prescribed time to eat matzah? Well, it's connected to Karban Pesach. Well, what's the correct time to bring the Karban Pesach? It's machlokes Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says he got the whole night. So if we had an account of Rabbi Akiva discussing the events of Yetzias Mitzrayim the whole night, we would understand it. It's l'shitasai. Rabbi Akiva holds that Pesach could be brought the whole night, matzah could be eaten the whole night, and you could discuss the events of Yetzias Mitzrayim the whole night. But Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, Balayla hazeh, you can only bring the Karban Pesach till Chatzos. Hence, you could only eat matzah till Chatzos. Accordingly, you could only speak about the events of Yetzias Mitzrayim until Chatzos. Can somebody tell me what the man is doing, staying up all night, relating the events of Yetzias Mitzrayim? He's wasting his time. The mitzvah is over. What's he doing? He could, Abarbanel asks the question, he should go to sleep. Because there's a mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov. Part of, I don't know about you, but for me personally, I get enjoyment out of sleeping on Yom Tov. That's Simchas Yom Tov. Why would he discuss the events of Yetzias Mitzrayim if the Zman is over in his book? He holds the mitzvahs only till Chatzos. Comes Abarbanel. Abarbanel says a very important principle. Abarbanel says they weren't discussing the miracle to fulfill the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. They were discussing the miracle because there's a special obligation not only to say over the story, but to relive the story. Chayiv Adam, according to the Rambam's text, laharois es atzmai ki'ilu hu yatsa mi'Mitzrayim, a person is obligated to display, to show himself as if he personally is leaving Mitzrayim. It's not enough to read the Haggadah, you have to literally relive the experience. The night the Jewish people left Egypt, they were leaving all night. They were eating the matzah, they were eating the Karm Pesach, they were preparing to go, they stayed up all night. Says Abarbanel, these shalemim did not relate the events to fulfill the technical mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, but there's an additional facet of the mitzvah that extends even beyond Chatzos, and that is you have to relive the experience. So they were saying over the story as part of fulfillment of this obligation. Therefore, even though Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah says a mitzvah is till Chatzos, that's the technical mitzvah of Sipur. But the mitzvah of Chayiv Adam Lirois Es Atzmai extends the entire evening. Chassam Sofer expands this idea. Chassam Sofer says, you think you only have to relive the leaving? Do you have to relive the bondage? Sure, you have to relive the bondage also. Well, if you have to relive the bondage, do we have to vividly imagine that we were in the state that the Jewish people were in the land of Egypt? Sure. What state were they in? They were on the 49th level of Tumah. Did they even have Kedushas Yisrael? They didn't. They were not selected yet. They were not elevated to the status of Kedushas Yisrael. Says the Chassam Sofer, although we always make mitzvahs before we perform a mitzvah, there's one exception to that rule. There's one instance where we make the bracha after we fulfill the mitzvah. Who remembers? There's one situation where we make a bracha after we fulfill a mitzvah. That is when a convert immerses in the mikvah. They first immerse and then they make the bracha. Because how could they say Asher Kedushanu b'mitzvaysav? They weren't sanctified yet. They first have to enter the covenant. They have to be elevated to the status of Yisrael, and then they can make the bracha. To highlight the importance of imagining that you're actually in Mitzrayim, the Chazal purposely omitted any brachos from the Haggadah until we relived the experience and we actually left, and now we can make brachos. But once we say that kiddush, and we, so to speak, activate the holiness of the night, then we're literally in the tumah of Mitzrayim, and we'll take the matzah, we'll break the matzah, the Chassam Sofer says. When do we ever break bread and not make a bracha? And we don't make a bracha. And we don't make a bracha on the Haggadah. And we don't say Sha'asa Nisim. Not until we've relived Mitchila Oivdei Avodah Zarah. In other words, we have to relive not only the Exodus, not only the bondage, but we relive the Mitchila Oivdei Avodah Zarah Hayu Avoseinu. And then when we say the story, and we leave, and we say Asher Ga'alanu, now we're ready to make a bracha. So I would humbly suggest there's no contradiction for the reason of matzah. It's part of vividly feeling and imagining the moment as it's happening. So if we were to ask in the beginning of the Seder, Tal, why are you eating matzah? Were you going to say, because Hashem took us out quickly? What are you talking about? We didn't leave yet. Right now we're currently in Egypt. We're in the land of Egypt. We're Oivdei Avodah Zarah, and we have matzah on our table, and everyone's asking us, what is this thing on your table? Right now, the answer is, this is the poor man's bread that we eat in Egypt. And this might explain, all the Rishonim ask, we have this unusual phrase, Kol ditzrich, yesei v'yifsach, anyone who needs, come, partake of the carbon Pesach. What do you mean partake of the carbon Pesach? You bring a carbon Pesach? Tell me. You could tell me now. I won't tell anyone. I have a cousin in Eretz Yisrael. He's a great man. He was He's a MK. He was an MK. And he started a program that he got Reb Chaim Kanievsky to endorse, where, see, the problem is, in Eretz Yisrael, they ear tag all the sheep. So it renders the sheep a balmum. So he started a program, he got Reb Chaim Kanievsky on board, not to ear tag sheep 30 days before Pesach, so in case Mashiach comes, they'll have good sheep to bring for the Karban Pesach. So there are people that they bring the Karban Pesach.
What's ear tagging?
They put a tag on the ear, and it goes through the ear, like many animals have labels, but it might render it a balmum. So before Pesach, he got Reb Chaim to endorse this program. But what do we mean? Kol ditzrich yesei v'yipsach literally means anyone who needs, come partake of the Karban Pesach. What Karban Pesach? The answer is we're imagining ourselves in the land of Egypt. We're imagining ourselves with the Karban Pesach on our side, and maybe there's someone who doesn't have a chabura, and we're extending this invitation as a way of imagining and reliving not only the freedom, and we're saying not only the bondage, but even the metchila of the avodah zara, hayu aveiseinu. How are we doing? We good? A little bit more? Okay, I want to share with you an original approach to Haggadah Shel Pesach. I think it's very compelling, and I think it's very revolutionary. You know, the Haggadah begins with the story. The story is about 5 great Tanaim. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Tarfon, and Rabbi Akiva. These were the 5 greatest sages of the era. Rabbi Elazar Haggadol, there's an opinion in Masechta Avos, he outweighed all the Chachamim. Rabbi Yeshua is the Av Bezdin. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is the Nasi. Rabbi Akiva, the Gemara Menachos said, had a level above even Moshe Rabbeinu. Rav Tarfon maybe was a Rebbe, Rabbi Akiva. It's the who's who of all Sidarim. Question is, there's one man conspicuously absent from the Seder. The man who used to be the Nasi, and that's Ram Gamliel. Where in the world's Ram Gamliel? Where is he? He wasn't invited. He couldn't make it. He got stuck in traffic. You know, there's one other important account of a Seder brought in a Tosefta, and that account describes the Seder of Ram Gamliel. And Ram Gamliel was with his students, and Ram Gamliel, instead of saying the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Tosefta says he was learning holiest Pesach, which is of note. But why wasn't Ram Gamliel with these other Tanaim? And I didn't see this anywhere, but I think it's obvious why he wasn't there. Because if you look at the Rambam's Haggadah is found in the Yad HaChazaka. We have the text that the Rambam had of Haggadah Shel Pesach, where the Haggadah begins like this: Maseh, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon. Our text of the Haggadah reads, Omar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Harei ani keben shivim shana. The Rambam adds one word to the Haggadah that revolutionizes the Haggadah. The Rambam adds the word lohem. Omar lohem Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said to them, meaning at that fateful Seder, when Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon were sitting around the table, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said to them, Harei ani keben shivim shana. I feel like I'm 70 years old. And we know, how old was he in reality? He was 18. What day did Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah say that? That was the day that Ram Gamliel was deposed. That was the Gemara in Brachos says that Ram Gamliel was the Nasi. He came into the Beis Medrash. All right, Rabbi Yisrael, let's talk about Marav. Who has an opinion about Marav? And nobody would dare open up their mouth to Ram Gamliel, because Gamliel maintained great authority in the position of Nasias. Just before Ram Gamliel walked into the Beis Medrash, Rabbi Yeshua said, by the way, gentlemen, I hold Marav is discretionary. Marav is Rishus. But when Gamliel came in and he asked, anybody have an opinion about Marav? Nobody dared open their mouth, especially not Rabbi Yeshua, because Rabbi Yeshua was already put in his place on 2 occasions by Ram Gamliel. And Rabbi Yeshua didn't say anything. And then somebody said, hey, Rabbi Yeshua, I think you had something. Didn't you just say something? And no, not me. Until the truth came out, and Ram Gamliel put Rabbi Yeshua in his place a 3rd time. And he didn't let Rabbi Yeshua sit, and people were very unhappy. They felt for the honor of Rabbi Yeshua, and they got up and they deposed Rabbi Gamliel. And now they have a big dilemma. Who's going to be the Nasi? We can't make Rabbi Yeshua the Nasi. It's too political. We can't make Rabbi Akiva didn't have the yichus. They appointed Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He had yichus, he was wealthy, he had what it took. The Gemara says that on that fateful day, that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah became Nasi, the entire policy of the Beis Medrash changed. I would humbly suggest to you that the Haggadah fundamentally opens up with what happened on that day. Maisa, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva. That means historically, if you wanted to know, how does the Haggadah begin? On the day Ram Gamliel was deposed. You know why? Because there's a very important thing we need to do the night of the Seder. Because if you have children, not every child is a chacham. Sometimes there's a kid who's a tam, or a sheni de alisha, or a rasha. And you got to bring them into the house. You know, Ram Gamliel had a very strict policy. Ram Gamliel's policy was, Kol Talmud she'ein toichai kabaroi al yikansu. Any student that was not genuine from within and without can't come in. And he would have a guard at the door. He would, I don't know, maybe he had an app or something, he would scan you. And if you were legitimate, you came in. If you were illegitimate, you stayed out in the coffee room. The Gemara says that on the day Ram Gamliel was deposed, they added either 400 or 700 benches to the Beis Medrash. All of a sudden, everyone's coming in because they dropped the policy. The Mishnah in Avos, the Hamidu Talmidim Harbe, is referring to dropping the policy of Ram Gamliel. Ask you a very simple question. You think in the world of Ram Gamliel, you could bring all the kids to the table? You think you could bring the whole family to the table in the world of Ram Gamliel? You think Ram Gamliel is letting the Rasha in? The Tam, the Sheni Yadei Lishal? It would be a Beis Medrash and a home full of Chachamim. So the first thing we need to do is start the Haggadah with the well-known account of the story of Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi ben Azariah and Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon, that Ram Gamliel is not there. If he's not there, that means the policy is dropped. He's dropped, okay, Keneged Arba Banim, Dibra Torah, bring all the Kinder Lachen. But what's uncanny is how the Haggadah parallels the story in Brachos. Because the story continued. Ram Gamliel felt bad. Actually, the Gemara says Ram Gamliel started to regret his policy, and God showed him a dream. No, it's okay. And the Gemara says what God was saying is, no, it's okay to make you feel better, that you shouldn't feel guilty, but you're still wrong. That's what the Gemara says. And ultimately, Ram Gamliel goes and asks Mechila from Rabbi Yeshua. And Rabbi Yeshua says, no, you don't understand us. You don't understand the troubles of Talmidei Chachamim. And Ram Gamliel said, please forgive me. Forgive me for the sake of my forefathers. Simply, most Rishonim learn it. Forgive me because of my father, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. But if you look on the side of the Gemara, Rabbeinu Nisim, what Ram Gamliel was saying is, forgive me in the sake of the honor of my illustrious ancestor, Hillel Hazaki. Now the Gemara says that they had a great dilemma. So they're going to bring Ram Gamliel back. What do they do with Rabbi Yeshua? What did they do with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? Imagine you had a rabbi. You depose the rabbi. You bring in a new rabbi. You bring the old rabbi back. What do you do with the itinerary? What do you do with the rabbi in between? He's the assistant rabbi. He goes to a different place. It's not so comfortable. So the Gemara says, well, we can't fire Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Malim b'kodesh ve'im maridin. But to have them split the Shiurim, it's too political. So the Gemara said they came out with the following formula. Ram Gamliel teaches 3 out of 4 weeks, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah gets 1. So Gamliel got 3 weeks, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah got 1 week. And that's the question, Shabbos shel mi? Whose Shabbos is it? They always ask Shabbos. So you ready for the formula? The formula is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah gets 1 week, Ram Gamliel got 3 weeks. If we're correct that the Haggadah is paralleling this episode in the Gemara Brachos, so the Haggadah begins that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is the Nasi. It's the day he turned 18 years old. It's the day Ram Gamliel was deposed. And therefore all the kids could come into the home. So shouldn't Ram Gamliel come back to the Seder at the end like he does in Brachos? Sure he does. That's why at the very end of the Seder, hey Ram Gamliel, come back! Ram Gamliel haya oimer, kol shaloi amar shloisha dvarim halalu, lo yatsi deichai vasai. And look how parallel it is. Because ultimately the Gemara says Ram Gamliel got 3 weeks and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah got 1. And that's what we're giving Ram Gamliel. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah gets 1 halacha in the Haggadah, and Ram Gamliel gets 3 halachas in the Haggadah. Kol shaloi amar shloisha dvarim halalu. So you ask, but Ram Gamliel only came back in the merit of his ancestor Hillel. So we'll have to get Hillel into Haggadah. Zecher lemikdash ki Hillel. The names, the specific names written in the Haggadah parallel precisely all the personalities that are mentioned in that well-known account in the Gemara Brachos and Av Chav Zayin of the episode between Elazar ben Azariah and Gamliel in the merit of Hillel. And the lesson is, the night of the Seder, we got to open up our homes, we got to open up our hearts. It has to be an open door policy, and we have to see our children and our friends and our family for who they are and be receptive to them, and to try to engender the question in the tum, and to try to help the Sheni Yadei Elishel formulate his thoughts, and to defang the Russia. You know, as the Al-Shech HaKadosh says, if you take the numerical value of Russia and you subtract Shinav, you get Tzaddik. So that's what we try to do the night of the Seder. So those are just 3 important perspectives on the Haggadah. Number 1, the Haggadah is the creation of the future redemption. It's not about the past, it's about our destiny. Number 2, we have to relive the experience from beginning to end, not just the redemption, not just the bondage, but the actual Metchila Ovdei Avodah Zarah. And then seeing the parallel in the Haggadah to the famous account in Masechta Brachos. I thank you for your kind attention, and I wish you all a Chag Kosher v'Sameach. Thank you very much.